Monster Hunter Wilds is here, and the first decision we'll all have to make is which two weapons we should use. So let's talk about which weapons you should consider and which ones you might want to avoid so that you can choose the best weapons for you. If any of the terms I use in this video aren't familiar to you, be sure to check out my Monster Hunter Wilds Complete Beginner Guide next. I'll link it in the description of this video. Now let's dive into the tier list.
All right, first up, we've got the Greatsword. This is a massively weighty weapon with a much slower movement and attack speed than the rest of the weapons, but each blow packs a massive punch. This is a close range weapon with a slow windup. The Greatsword is known for having the highest highs and the lowest lows, or put another way, high risk and even higher reward. Not only that, it's fantastic for cutting the tails off of enemies. Packed into this massive weapon is not only offense, but also defense, as your Greatsword is actually so big that you can use it as a shield to block incoming attacks when necessary. And if you get the block timing just right, you can instigate a Power Clash. A Power Clash is a cinematic dynamic event that you can trigger with a well-timed block that can knock the enemy down or stagger them. This leaves the monster open to some very powerful follow-up combos that you can unleash on them. If you're looking for more of an offensive move to counter incoming damage with, you can use your Charge Slash as a counter attack to knock back an attacking monster. As with your other attacks, you can charge this attack up to 3 times, but your primary focus here is just to make sure that you release it at the right time to counter the monster attack that's coming in at you. In previous entries, the third chain of your combo was always the one that did all of your damage. This time around, they've distributed the damage more evenly between all of the stages. You don't have to focus on getting to max charge nearly as much as you did in the previous entries, giving you a much more consistent damage output this time around. Focus mode is a new feature that allows you to have much more control over the direction of your attacks than before, which makes these long charge-up attacks a lot easier to land than in previous entries. As mentioned, a massive source of damage in this game is by creating wounds, by attacking the same place repeatedly, then popping those wounds by hitting them with a focus strike. To that end, the Greatsword has a really convenient focus strike that drags your weapon down the side of the monster, making it easy to actually hit all of the open wounds. The hardest part about the Greatsword is your lack of mobility and your lack of speed. Being able to charge up your attack and fire it off before the enemy repositions can sometimes be difficult. For this reason, the Greatsword will definitely start to feel better when you get the skill Focus, which is going to allow you to charge your weapon much faster. So if you try this weapon early on without the Focus skill, just understand it's only going to feel better later. The Greatsword is a love it or hate it weapon for a lot of people. You either focus on the highs of that high damage swing, or you focus on the lows that come along with having some of the worst mobility in the game. Due to that slow mobility, to really be successful with this weapon requires you to be able to predict what the monster is going to do next, and position yourself to take advantage of that. But when you do pull it off, you are massively rewarded. For all of those reasons, we'll put the Greatsword into the S tier. Next up, we have the Longsword, a fan favorite and the most popular weapon back in Monster Hunter Worlds. But first, now this is an amazing weapon that's sure to bring you some big wins. But you know what else brings big wins? Getting 2 epic heroes. It's never been more fun to start this game because you'll also get 2 legendary heroes, Sun Wukong and Alice the Wanderer. Crush your way through the start of the game with this limited time offer. My favorite thing to do is to take these legendary heroes and head into the campaign while I'm watching Netflix or YouTube. It's just so satisfying to work your way through the campaign and eventually unlock Doom Tower, where you can put your chosen champions to the test while you fight your way up the tower. And if you like legendary champions, right now there's a global event happening called Alice's Adventure, complete with 5 brand new legendary champions inspired by the classic tale of Alice's adventures in Wonderland. Players can get their hands on Alice the Wanderer, Cheshire Cat, Mad Hatter, Knave of Hearts, and the fearsome Queen of Hearts. Best of all, players can get the legendary champion Alice the Wanderer for free, along with a bunch of rewards simply by opening raid on 14 different days, including Alice the Wanderer on day 7 and a 2-star perfect soul for her on day 14. You must start by March 26th to earn Alice this way. Get all 5 legendary champions through in-game events over the month. These events are available to both new and existing players, so don't miss out. Click my link in the description or scan my QR code to get insane bonuses that are only available via my link. You'll immediately get a huge starter pack with epic champion KELLAN the Shrike, and you'll get another starter pack once you hit level 15 that includes an epic champion TALLIA. These 2 champions are available after downloading via my custom link or QR code only. After downloading with my link, use promo code MonkeyKing to get the legendary champion Sun Wukong for free. This only lasts through February, so be fast. And join clan Vegeta Best Art 8888. Shout out to Raid for sponsoring the channel. Now let's get back to the video. Next up, we have the longsword, a fan favorite and the most popular weapon back in Monster Hunter Worlds. And I've got great news for fans of this weapon. It appears to be even easier to play than before. This weapon excels at swift movements and combos. And this will be one of the first classes we talk about that comes with a gauge that you're going to fill up by attacking the enemy. You can shortcut your way to higher spirit gauge levels by using your weapon's focus strike ability to pop a wound to instantly get spirit gauge levels. Gauge levels will go from empty all the way to the 3rd gauge level, red. And this time around, the longsword really incentivizes getting to and staying in that level 3 red gauge for as long as possible to unload massive damage. While in the red gauge, you gain access to new moves as well as increased mobility and damage. But the red spirit gauge depletes over time, so this pushes you into playing aggressively to keep your gauge filled up. Alternatively, you can consume your red gauge by releasing your Spirit Helmbreaker move. This is a powerful high damage move that you can combo into another high damage move. This weapon combines quick attacks, great mobility, and massive damage, which is why it's been so popular in past games. And this time around, the longsword has gained a lot of new combos over previous entries. This fan favorite is both incredibly effective and easy to use, so we're going to be putting the longsword into the S tier. Next up, we have the sword and shield. This weapon set is quick with great mobility, a really nice combination of offense and defense, and it's one that I think a lot of people are going to enjoy. Don't let the sword and shield fool you. This weapon can put out a ton of damage. On top of that, while the shield actually does a fantastic job of blocking, it can also be used offensively to bash some heads. Hit the monster's head with your shield or force a power clash with a well-timed block to knock the enemy down, and then follow that up with some high damage combos to capitalize. After you knock the monster down, just follow up one of your attacks with a backstab to jump on the monster's back. It's worth noting that once mounted on a monster's back, you're able to do insane damage to the monster while also heavily tiring them out. You can do this with any weapon, it's just easier to do with some than others. Helping the sword and shield lean into its great mobility is the fact that it's one of only 3 weapons that can use its focus strike while in the air. Combine those factors, and that means applying wounds and then taking advantage of those wounds is easier with this weapon than most. One of my favorite abilities is your charge slash, which does fantastic damage as you leap up into the air and then stab down. Speaking of forgiving, you'll receive loads of iframes while in the backstab and sliding swipe animations, so be sure to take advantage of that. For all of these reasons, we'll be putting the sword and shield into A tier. Next up, we have the dual blade. This is a great weapon, but very complicated for players to use compared to others. So if you're a new player, or if you're someone that's having trouble mastering the combos, this could be one of the tougher weapons for you to get the hang of. The dual blades are a short range, high attack speed, and great mobility weapon set. The focus of the dual blades is to get into your demon mode, and then build up your demon gauge. To build up the demon gauge, you simply do regular attacks in demon mode. You can consume the gauge with powerful blade dance and demon flurry combos for massive damage. Once you fill up the demon gauge, you can enter the archdemon mode, and while in these modes, you'll have access to new moves and increased evasion, which is part of why this weapon has such fantastic mobility. This is all for a reason. This weapon set is built for you to try to perform perfect dodges. This is something you're going to want to do very often with these weapons, and this will give you a buff that grants you access to additional moves. Your dodges will now do damage as well as buff subsequent attacks, making perfect dodge a big part of the dual blade playstyle. It's a really flashy, really fast-paced weapon set with one of the coolest combos in the game that sends you slashing down the enemy's back. At first, it might feel like you're lacing your enemy with paper cuts, but this weapon type really starts to shine once you're able to craft status effects onto your dual blades, like paralysis and fire. The dual blades, high mobility, and high damage are going to be a really popular combination, but between the combos and the gauge management, this is definitely going to be one of the more complicated weapons to play. For all of these reasons, we're going to go ahead and put the dual blades into A tier. Next up, we have the hammer. The hammer is a large blunt weapon featuring high damage and decent mobility, but best of all, this is a fantastic weapon for new players because it's one of the simplest weapons in the game. The goal is simple. The hammer is all about giving your enemy a concussion. Quickly bash the face of your enemy to stun them. If time allows, charge your attacks whenever possible to make them do even more damage and more stun. Let them rip and spin to win. The hammer allows fantastic chaining of switching between spinning to win and bonking enemy brains. This has the amazing effect of quickly sending enemies into a stunned state. Once you start feeling confident with the weapon, you'll have access to a counterattack that allows you to stand your ground when enemies attack rather than running away. And it's one of the easiest counterattacks to pull off in the game. Just use your upswing attack as the enemy attacks you to knock them on their butt. All in all, this is a fantastic weapon. It's great for new players, it's great for veterans, it's got great mobility, and it's able to knock enemies down with ease, and it's just got great damage. For all of these reasons, we're going to be putting the hammer in S tier. Next up, we have the hunting horn. This is basically the hunting horn from Monster Hunter World and Rise combined into one. Do you ever wish you could dance and play instruments while beating down massive beasts? then you've come to the right place. The hunting horn can place down buffs on the ground for both you and your party, and this time around you can deal damage while buffing. Allowing the buff process to deal damage feels great, and it means you've got a lot more consistent damage output, and it'll prevent you from feeling like a buff bot. While other weapons have gauges, the hunting horn has melodies that you can play for some extra damage. On top of that, you can store up notes and unleash them during your performance for big damage. This is one of the more complicated weapons to play because it's got multiple mini games tucked within it. Beyond the fact that you can store notes for extra damage, you can also trigger what's called a self-improvement, where you'll have to perfectly time your inputs to deal even more damage. Basically, if you play the song and you play it well, you're rewarded. While these minigames make this weapon more difficult than the rest, it does have the easiest counterattack to land of all the weapons. Oh, and though you wouldn't expect it with the horn, you can use one of its buffs to do slash damage in case you need to cut a tail off. The hunting horn is an incredibly powerful weapon, but it does come with a lot of extra work in order to play it well. For that reason, we'll be placing it in the A tier. Next up, we have the lance. This is a lance and shield combo that both allows and requires you to play very aggressively. Blessed with one of the highest defense loadouts in the game, you'll find yourself spending your time up close and personal with your enemies. Taking advantage of the massive shield you're lugging around is exactly how you're able to consistently put out great damage with this low mobility weapon. It comes with thrust attacks that are quick and safe to execute. It has a powerful triple thrust attack that does sizable damage, and a charged double thrust when time allows for it. But just as important as the lance is the massive shield that accompanies it. You can use your shield to power clash and knock enemies back, opening up big damage windows for you and your team. Charging up your attacks is quite a bit easier than most weapons because you can use your shield to block while charging up your weapon attacks. This is one of the weapons that will really start feeling good once you've got some elemental damage crafted onto it, as you're able to park under those bosses and stack up that Ellie damage. It's also one of the easier weapons to pull off and capable of doing big damage, though the low mobility can be frustrating at times. You'll often find yourself so far underneath enemies that it'll feel like you're inside of them, which can be disorienting, but you'll still be alive, which is more than most can say in that position. For all of these reasons, we'll put Lance in the S tier. Next, we have the Gunlance. While the Gunlance has less mobility than most of the other weapons on this list, it has more mobility than it had in past entries. You can easily sidestep to more quickly reposition this heavy weapon set, and that's going to be critical for effectively maximizing your damage. Once again, you'll have a massive shield to absorb damage, and you're going to be heavily rewarded for using it. Unlike the Lance, the Gunlance is able to both slash and shoot your enemies. You'll notice that you have a shell gauge on the side of the screen, and you're going to want to pay attention to that. You can unload your shells one at a time into the enemy, or you can unload them all at once for quick and massive damage at close range. Now, while you're able to fire shells, this is very much a close range weapon, so don't expect to be standing behind the back line firing this weapon into your enemy. With that said, this weapon does have decent range as far as melee weapons go, and great news for fans of the Gunlance, shelling now scales, so this weapon is going to perform a lot better at the endgame than in previous entries. And thanks to that beautiful shield you're carrying around, you can force clashes with your enemy that you can follow up with a powerful attack where you jam your Gunlance into the monster's mouth and unload it. It feels good every time. This is one of the easiest weapons to use while also having some of the highest defense. This makes it great for new players and veterans, and for all of those reasons, I'm going to be placing the Gunlance into S tier. Next up, we have the Switch Axe. Now, this is a fun and flashy weapon, but it's also one of the slightly more complicated weapons to play because you're going to be building up your gauge while also regularly switching between axe and sword mode. The axe mode will excel at slower, longer reaching attacks, while the sword mode will give you faster, shorter range attacks. With this weapon, you'll focus on filling up your switch gauge to do big damage. You'll build up your gauge with constant axe strikes and then unleash the gauge while in sword form with epic sword abilities. Generally, you'll be working up towards your ability called Full Release Slash, which not only does amazing damage, but also gives you hyper armor while performing it. This has a long animation, so getting this hyper armor for the duration is massive for the weapon and will make landing this attack effectively a lot easier. You can counter enemy attacks with both the sword and the axe version of this weapon. However, the sword version of this counterattack does very little damage compared to the axe version. Overall, the Switch Axe is a solid weapon that does great damage, good mobility, but it's one of the more complicated weapons to play. And for all of those reasons, we'll be placing it into the B tier. Next up, we have the Charge Blade. This is definitely one of the more difficult weapons to use, with players having a lot more to do to really maximize its damage. Like the Switch Axe, this weapon morphs between two different modes. The first is sword mode, which allows for much higher mobility. While in sword mode, your goal is to charge your files, which are this weapon's version of a gauge. Once charged, you'll be able to deal massive massive damage while in axe mode. Your axe in this case is made by attaching the sword to the shield. Yeah, it's pretty gnarly. You can overcharge your files, which allows you to increase the damage you do with those files by around 40%. Alternatively, after loading files, you can use them to boost your shield, making it even more effective. To enter Savage Axe mode, you must get perfect blocks or consume a wound with a focus strike. After entering Savage Axe mode, you get to take advantage of some very easy to pull off and very powerful attacks that do massive damage. Best of all, you can only consume half of your files while in Savage Axe mode, which means you can enjoy that mode for a lot longer once you get into it. It feels like Savage Axe mode is where the developers really want you to spend most of your time this time around. Since you do have a shield, you can go for a power clash, which if you time it right, will knock enemies back down on their butts. In multiplayer, it's really going to help if you have the monster focusing you so that you can take advantage of using your perfect block to go into Savage Axe mode. And once in Savage Axe mode, you're an absolute beast. So for that reason, we're going to put this one into the S tier. Next up, we have the Insect Glaive. The Insect Glaive is a high mobility weapon that you can use while controlling a creature known as a Kinsect. The Kinsect will help you gain powerful buffs by harvesting extracts from the monsters. Once you've harvested these extracts, you can use them to unleash your attacks, or you can choose to charge up your most powerful attacks with all 3 essences, resulting in some really cool attacks. You can also choose to hold on to the extracts, and while you have all 3 extracts, you'll gain extra resistances that allow you to play more aggressively. Conveniently, your most powerful attack doubles as your counter if used at the right time during an enemy attack. This weapon has a pretty high difficulty ceiling because not only is managing your extracts with your Kinsect a lot of work relative to other weapons, but also the act of vaulting can be a finger twister when combined with your combos. As a result, controlling this weapon style can be one of the hardest parts about it. For all of those reasons, we'll be placing this weapon in the B tier. Next up, we have Light BowGun. The Light BowGun is a mid-range weapon. It's faster and more mobile than its sibling, the Heavy BowGun, which we'll be talking about next. The Light BowGun has a meter that when active causes you to go into rapid fire mode. You'll use this rapid fire energy to fire in quick succession, and then you'll replenish your rapid fire gauge by landing regular shots. This weapon allows you to place a Wyvern Blast on the ground to blow up your enemies. Your Focus Strike can turn the weapon into a grenade launcher, and the best part about the grenade launcher is that it will do massive damage per wound on the monster. As a result, this is one of the best Focus Strikes in the entire game. So the rotation will look a little bit like this. You'll fire your regular shots to build up your meter, go into rapid fire mode, and then you'll use your grenade to pop the wounds once they've been formed, giving this weapon a fun and intuitive rotation. On top of that, this weapon has more utility than most weapons. It can use ammo that buffs you and your allies, or ammo that applies status elements, or elemental ammo to take advantage of monster weaknesses. You'll want to use your tracer shots as often as possible to speed up the cooldown on your recovery rate for your rapid fire mode. This is a very easy weapon to pick up and play, and it's tons of fun. And for all of these reasons, we're going to be placing this one into the A tier. Next up, we have the Heavy BowGun. The Heavy BowGun is a long-ranged weapon that can fire from a distance. It's much slower with much less mobility than the Light BowGun, and most weapons in general. This weapon's special gauge is known as its ignition gauge, and it can turn the weapon into a machine gun, allowing you to hold down your attack to unleash a rapid fire of bullets. When in standard mode, your attacks charge your ignition gauge, so you'll be constantly switching between the 2 modes at long range. You do have a shield built into your Heavy BowGun that you can use to trigger a power clash. Overall, this is a slow weapon with a slow sheath animation, but that is somewhat mitigated by the fact that you have an auto guard that will automatically block basic frontal attacks, helping you stand your ground. When you really want to keep your distance, it's a decent option, and for all of those reasons, we'll be placing this weapon into the A tier. Next up, we have the bow. The bow is a medium to close range weapon. Now you might be thinking, close range with the bow? What's that all about? Well, it turns out you have fantastic mobility with the bow and are rewarded for using it. So let's go over the weapon. Landing attacks or a perfect dodge will help fill up your trick gauge. So you're going to fill up your trick arrow gauge, and then you're going to use the gauge to apply coatings to your arrows or to fire tracer arrows. The bow was massively reworked for the better from previous games, and I think the favorite addition that players are going to have is the addition of tracing arrows. Now the bow can place a tracer arrow on the enemy that all future attacks will automatically track towards. Then, if that wasn't useful enough, after a period of time, the tracing arrows will explode, dealing even more damage. As a result, the bow is going to be the go-to weapon for mid-range damage for a lot of players. Successfully pulling off a perfect evade also replenishes your stamina, so the game is really rewarding you for playing fast and loose with this weapon. But the flashiest part of the weapon has got to be your 1000 Dragons attack, which rains arrows down on your enemies. This is going to be an absolutely brilliant weapon, new player friendly, veteran friendly, and just tons of fun. And for all of these reasons, I'll be placing it in the S tier. Last but definitely not least, we have the most powerful weapon in the game. Rocks. No, not that rock.
these rocks. Just as important as the weapon that you're wielding is the terrain around you. So be sure to take advantage of those rocks that you can drop onto enemies, the vines that you can entangle them in, and the blinding traps, and so on. This is going to be the most powerful tool in your kit. And taking advantage of these is going to be the difference between you succeeding and failing a lot of the endgame hunts. For all of these reasons, we'll be placing rocks in the double S tier.
Now, of course, all of this is subject to change with balancing at launch and beyond, so don't take any of this too seriously. Pick the weapon that looks fun to you and give it a go. You can absolutely use any weapon in this game to do everything in this game. So it's really just about finding which one you're going to enjoy the most. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like and subscribe for more Monster Hunter Wilds content, like the ones popping up on screen right now or linked down in the description of this video. Massive shout out to my YouTube channel members. If you want to become a member for behind the scenes footage, access to a private Discord channel where you can ask me questions about the game and more, hit the join button down below or in the description. And don't forget to download the sponsor of today's video using the QR code on screen or the link in the description to take advantage of all the new player rewards. Thanks so much for watching, and if you're not sure what to do next, maybe check out one of my other videos popping up right now. I hope to see you in the next one.